Welcome to our webinar on agrivoltaics, maximizing farm viability with solar and agriculture. We're going to wait just a minute or two just to let everybody get linked in. I know we just started to open it up for the participants in the waiting room, so we'll give it just another minute until the participants get on. All right, we'll give it just another about 30 seconds and then we'll get started. All right, we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome to Maryland Farm Bureau's in partnership with American Farmland Trust and Lightstar Solar to put on a webinar today on agrivoltaics, maximizing farm viability with solar and agriculture together. And so your host today, or the moderator, Colby Ferguson, here on behalf of Maryland Farm Bureau. I work as the Director of Government Relations on state affairs here in Maryland. And so today we're going to have a discussion on the viability of agrivoltaics, or dual use solar, as some of you know, and really break down and dive into some case studies we've got two excellent farm operations on here that are utilizing and doing agrivoltaics, and they'll talk about the do's and don'ts and the things that they did to get into it. And maybe if there's others of you that are looking to do the same thing, to kind of glean some information off of them, as well as with our experts from American Farmland Trust, as well as one of our solar companies that specializes in agrivoltaics. So just some household discussions here. So if you want to ask some questions, we feel free to put them in the chat or in the Q&A. We will make sure I'll be watching those and try to stop every so often as we work through our panels. We have some good visuals to show you some of the examples of agrivoltaics that are around the state and around the country as well. So with that said, again, thank you all. We want this to be as informative as possible. We want you to ask questions if you have them. We're leaving time, particularly at the end, to go to straight Q&A. So don't think that we're just going to blow through here and then stop and leave you without getting your questions answered. So, but if you think of them, put them in the chat and we'll get them answered as we go along. With that said, I'm going to go ahead and stop here and let our panelists introduce themselves. So we'll start with Ethan. You want to introduce yourself?
Good afternoon. My name is Ethan Winter. I'm the Northeast Solar Specialist for American Farmland Trust, and I work in support of 3 regional programs, including the Mid-Atlantic region, on smart solar and solar policy. Thanks for having us, Colby.
Amanda, you want to introduce yourself too?
Thanks, Colby. I'm Amanda Cather. I'm the Mid-Atlantic Program Manager for American Farmland Trust, working on farmland protection, farm stewardship, and farm viability in Maryland, Pennsylvania, and Virginia.
Thank you. Lucy?
Hi, I'm Lucy Bullock-Seeger. I'm the Vice President of Strategy for Lightstar Renewables. We are a distributed generation developer. We are specializing in agrivoltaics, and we have about 20 sites across 5 states, and Maryland is one of them. So we're looking forward to answering some questions and letting people know what this looks like and how it could work.
Thank you, Lucy. Byron?
Hi, folks. My name is Byron Kominek, owner and manager of Jack Solar Garden in Boulder County, Colorado, and also the executive director of the Colorado Agrivoltaic Learning Center, helping folks better understand agriculture combined with solar here in Colorado.
Thank you, Byron. And our final panelist is Nick.
Hi, everybody. I'm Nick Armentrout. I'm calling in from southern Maine, where I have a small livestock and crop farm. I'm also a board member of the American Solar Grazing Association, which I'm going to be presenting wearing that hat today. And then outside of that, I also consult on agrivoltaics and integrating agriculture with solar sites across the U.S. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Nick. And thank you all for being on with us today. And, obviously agrivoltaics is brand new to Maryland. And so we don't really have examples that we can look at as viable options. We've got solar that's sprouting up all around the state, particularly on the Eastern Shore. And we're just trying to look at some alternatives instead of just planting a bunch of panels and nothing else growing there other than grass. Is there a way that we can actually link these two together and actually continue to farm that ground, similar to what they do in the Midwest when it comes to wind turbines? They just farm around those and continue to go. But solar is a little different because it is more of a horizontal use of the land. And so wanted to start off and start with our team from American Farmland Trust to kind of kick us off here. We've got some PowerPoint presentations, so I think Lucy, you're gonna do the slides, but I'll turn it over to our team from AFT to get us started. Ethan.
Great. We've got a kickoff slide here, Lucy. Thank you. Thank you to the Maryland Farm Bureau for having us here today. It's really an important time to be engaging farmers and ag service providers and solar developers in Maryland on these issues. Climate impacts are accelerating. As Colby has mentioned, solar has arrived, and there is growing interest in agriculturally compatible strategies and applications that keep farms viable and benefit farm communities. So this could not be more timely. I am going to provide a kind of a basic framework for how American Farmland Trust is working in solar, and I'll be mentioning our Farms Under Threat report and several other sources of information, and that will tee up Lucy, Byron, and Nick in our discussion. Next slide, please. Thanks. So American Farmland Trust was founded 40 years ago. Many of you on the call are quite familiar with AFT. Our mission is to save the land that sustains us by protecting farmland, promoting sound farming practices, and keeping farmers on the land. And it turns out that that mission has a lot to do with how solar development is expanding across the country right now. In our climate strategies, we're really focusing on seeing agriculture as part of the solution to the climate challenge. And that means protecting the most productive farmland, accelerating regenerative practices that protect soil health, and engaging directly in the conversation on solar. We recognize that a significant portion of the land that we're going to need for this energy transition is agricultural land. So how do we make sure that farmers are full partners in this transition and have the opportunity to benefit? And that means some real cross-sector collaboration and just the kinds of conversations we're having today. We've been fighting farmland loss at AFT for, again, 40 years. And today we're really understanding that solar could potentially be another driver for farmland conversion on top of the historical variables that we've seen before that have moved farmland to low density residential development and urban and high density development and other losses of farm functionality. Solar can really cut in different ways, and AFT is taking a nuanced approach to this. Maryland and the Mid-Atlantic region will play a really important role nationally in how this all plays out. And that's why we're really looking to position solar in a way that can support soil health and farm viability. We want to see solar that benefits farmers and is aligned with climate smart agricultural practices. It's probably helpful to provide a snapshot on where we are with Maryland. This is a graphic from our Farms Under Threat 2040 report. And we did an analysis looking at historic trends between 2001 and 2016. Looking forward, using 3 different scenarios, we saw significant threats to Maryland's existing farmland. And a business as usual scenario projects that Maryland could lose almost 180,000 acres over the next 20 years. So there are significant, again, threats to farmland in Maryland. That would be almost 8% of the existing agricultural land. Solar is, again, potentially additive to these threats, but it could also be in the other direction. It could help stabilize the land base, support farmers, and provide a whole new avenue for agriculture. So that's something that we're really pushing to explore here. So fundamentally, the question for us is how can we direct solar in a way that supports farm viability and also reduces the negative impacts? To Colby's point earlier, how do we make sure that we're not facing binary trade-offs here between energy generation and food and fiber production? And the concept of agrivoltaics and dual use is growing globally. The United States is not the only place where this is really a major issue. We're looking to Europe and to Asia, where this is emerging as a really important strategy as well. This is the framework that we've used at AFT to really think about how to engage on solar. It helps to understand where we are and where we're headed. There's a lot of good information out there. Sometimes it's a bit overwhelming. The U.S. Energy Information Administration collects excellent information for state and national projections on energy. And what we're seeing here is, the enormous growth that's expected in utility scale solar in coming decades. There will be a lot of solar that's added to barns and rooftops as well, under a megawatt. But most of the solar that's coming will be a megawatt and larger. And many of these projects will be very significant, 100 to 200, even 500 megawatt projects. And many of those could impact agricultural land. These scenarios are going to be accelerated with incentives from the Inflation Reduction Act and state policies in Maryland and elsewhere. And just the basic economics of solar are going to drive this. Solar is now the lowest cost source of new energy generation. And again, just the economics of it make a lot of sense. So we're looking at the future here, and we're just at the beginning of this inflection. That's why it's so important that we get this right. It's helpful to understand the different segments in solar. This graphic shows basically 4 different components to solar. We have residential solar, rooftop solar, commercial solar that's typically tied to an off-taker, business or manufacturer that needs that power. Community solar, which is the green bar, and Maryland is looking to basically retool and reinitiate its community solar program, which is very exciting. And then the blue bar on top is utility scale. These are the larger projects, for example, in Maryland that would be connected to the PJM regional grid. And the bulk of the power moving forward in the US is going to be utility scale. But that's not to diminish the other aspects here that are going to be important to farmers. One thing that AFT has been looking at is how much land are we actually talking about? The Department of Energy last year released a study, actually it was in 2021, called the Solar Futures Study. And in the Solar Futures Study, there was a projection of 8 to 10 million acres of land needed to meet decarbonization and electrification targets by mid-century. In Maryland, that included about 120,000 acres of ground-mounted utility solar. We're noticing a significant solar in other states as well. 8 of the top 10 solar states right now are also considered high threat for farmland loss based on AFT's farms under threat analysis. So again, we're looking at states that could have 500,000 to 1 million acres of solar development in coming decades. And it's so important that we understand the implications of that and shape solar in a way that supports agriculture, because often we're sharing the same resource here. Going back to our farms under threat analysis that AFT released last year, I wanted to just again highlight that Maryland has lost 100,000 acres in recent decades to land conversion. Solar could be an additive element to that. And we need to make sure that we're understanding how that interplays. So next few slides, I'm going to talk a little bit more about how dual use in particular is emerging as a strategy for us. Again, understanding different kinds of solar and how it's distributed and located on the land helps us understand holistically the benefits and the challenges of solar. So we're seeing, especially with the Inflation Reduction Act and funding for the REAP program, that's the Rural Energy America program through USDA, very significant incentives and cost share for on-farm solar. And this is a terrific new opportunity for farmers. At the other end of the extreme, you have utility scale solar that could occupy hundreds or even thousands of acres of farmland. That energy is not plugged into local farms, but is transported to load centers on high voltage transmission lines. And in the middle, you have community solar. Those are projects that are often going to occupy a portion of a single farm, and that energy will be distributed by the local utility for local users. And that's a space where we see a lot of promise for agrivoltaics. So where is Maryland now in terms of its kind of energy trajectory? You can see that there was a spike in residential solar a few years ago, and right now there's kind of a balanced mix between utility scale and residential. That community solar piece is an area that could really grow with a new program in Maryland. And community solar paired with agrivoltaics is an area that other states are looking at as well, including New Jersey and New York. We think, again, this is a really interesting market segment to be scaling up agrivoltaics. Next slide. So as AFT has learned about these issues, we've developed 4 guiding principles for how we're informing our policy work, our on-the-ground services to farmers, and our research. Makes sense as a farmland organization that our first principle is to prioritize solar in areas that does not create negative impacts on farms, and particularly our most productive farmland. So we're really trying to minimize negative impacts. Secondly, we're looking to advance standards and best practices to ensure soil health and agricultural functionality. That includes things like construction practices, making sure we're taking care of the land during the operation of the projects, and having strong decommissioning requirements for when those projects reach the end of their functional life. Third, we're really interested in growing agrivoltaics. This is what we're talking about here. A compatible approach that allows for agricultural production and energy for the life of the project, not just for the first couple of years. And this is well beyond pollinators. This is really thinking about how we're designing programs or projects intentionally to support agricultural production. As Colby mentioned, this is a work in progress. There's a lot of research happening in this area, but AFT sees a lot of promise if we get this right. And speakers to follow will highlight some important advances in this thinking. And finally, we're looking through the lens of equity and farm viability in all of this work. We really want to see farmers as full partners in this energy transition, as I mentioned earlier. They're not just signers on a lease. They are the landowners and the gatekeepers for this energy transition. And seen in that light, I think there's a lot of benefit that can occur as we think about developing solar in a way that's compatible for farm communities. Next slide. These are some of the potential ways this could look. And we're going to hear from Byron and the project that he's doing with Jack's Solar Garden, and from Lucy, some of the projects that they're designing. There are both what I would say more conventional systems that are single axis trackers or fixed tilt, as well as elevated panels that could tolerate crop production and grazing. As you elevate these panels, you may incur additional costs. So one of the things we're all exploring together is opportunities to have market incentives to offset those costs so that there's an ability to elevate panels if that's the right way to do that. You can also have increased spacing between the rows to allow for that agricultural functionality. Next slide. These are some pictures of projects that are in operation now around the country, where there's rotational sheep grazing, poultry, specialty crops. The lower left picture is from Byron's project, and elevated panels in the lower right from Massachusetts. This is one of the first projects to qualify for the Massachusetts dual use incentive. And you'll see a pretty unique design there. We're learning from Massachusetts in terms of what makes sense for incentives and requirements. And we can talk more about that in the discussion. There's a lot of research happening in this, as I mentioned. The University of Illinois is partnering with the USDA on a major research project known as SCAPES. I just want to mention it briefly. This is a $10 million 4-year project involving several research institutions. And this is an example of the investment that USDA is starting to make in agrivoltaics alongside with DOE and its programs. So this is one to keep an eye on as researchers and the agricultural community are looking at ways to optimize food production, energy production, and do all that in a way that works for farmers. The National Renewable Energy Lab recently came out with a very useful guide. It's known as the 5 C's of agrivoltaic success factors. And we'll make sure that link is in our materials. This was a compilation of experiences and research from around the country and internationally, looking at the key factors and considerations for agrivoltaics. Makes sense that you want to make sure that you're pairing the on-the-ground conditions to the project that you're designing. You want to make sure the technology is matched to the agricultural services and activities that you're looking for. That requires some real expertise in agronomy and thinking about the crop and selection and the cultivation methods. This is the bleeding edge for agrivoltaics right now. It's really thinking about how we do this on the ground, what kinds of training farmers need to be successful in this space. And I'll just highlight the collaboration and partnerships aspect of this. This is really critical. And again, I applaud the Farm Bureau for convening us today, because having these cross-sector conversations allows us to unlock the potential for this approach. AFT is leaning in several different areas, and I just wanted to highlight the Department of Energy recently has a funding opportunity for agrivoltaics research known as the FARMS funding opportunity. We're partnering with Rutgers University to develop a farmer training program in agrivoltaics, and that will be alongside Rutgers research. They're developing several test sites for agrivoltaics as part of their agricultural experiment stations. This is the kind of work together that is going to enable us to really design the best standards for agrivoltaics going forward. Cornell and NYSERDA are working on this, ASGA as well, which Nick will speak to. And the trade associations understand that this is a really important way, again, to deploy more solar in a way that is less oppositional and more beneficial to rural communities. So we're really excited about these partnerships going forward. I'm going to close with just a mention that American Farmland Trust will be hiring a Mid-Atlantic solar specialist later this year. So more capacity is coming to Maryland and Virginia and Pennsylvania in this area. And Amanda could speak to that later. The resources listed here are just an example of some of the work that we're doing, integrating solar into AFT's research and publications. One that I just want to highlight for the group is a leasing guide for agricultural landowners. We released this just at the end of last year. It's a terrific guide, really focused on the Pacific Northwest, but we think it's a really useful template for landowners anywhere who are interested in navigating that solar question, making sure that they're making choices that meet the values and interests of their farm. And so more to come on all of that. And I'm going to now yield the floor to Lucy. Thanks.
Before we move to Lucy, Ethan and Amanda, there was a question that was one that I don't know. You talked about the research that was being done in the training programs for farmers to look into these. Are there any training programs for solar developers for the companies that maybe want to move from community solar or from utility and maybe grab into the agrivoltaics? Do you know of any out there?
That's a great question. I know that the Department of Energy and the Inspire program are continuing to provide technical assistance. That's something we could get back to you on in terms of specific programs in this area. I think if the industry were able to communicate a real need for that, there would be an enthusiastic response from DOE to provide some programming there. We'd be happy to elevate that.
All right, cool. And Lucy, when you're doing your presentation, if there's some things that you guys did as far as some sort of training or ways that you figured out how to get into this realm, that would be good to bring that out too. So I'll turn it over to you.
And thanks, Ethan. Thanks everybody for coming. Let me make sure I have control of my own screen. Here we go. So thanks everybody for having us, and we're really excited about Maryland in particular. Ethan talked about the farmland loss and how important that is, not only just for Maryland, but the region and the nation and security. And we view that as a huge part of our mission and why we pivoted to include agrivoltaics in our portfolio of assets. So, we have, I mentioned 20 sites of agrivoltaics. We've got about 1 gigawatt of sites in development across the nation, all sorts of assets. But specifically, we've got 20 of those in AgPV sites and a few of them in Maryland. And so we see there's a need not only for policy preferences, but also for farmland protection and farm viability. And that's where we really come to this conversation. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the process, about what happens if somebody's interested and wants to have their land evaluated and help them through the process. And Ethan talked a little bit about farmer training. We welcome kind of the national efforts to get more farmers trained, but for right now we do it. We have an agrivoltaics consultant that helps hand in hand with the farmer make farm plans, and we have that service on contract through the life of our projects, which are typically like 25 to 30 years. So we are also an owner operator, so that means that we won't flip these sites. We're here for the long haul. So that's also what kind of makes our business model conducive to adopting agrivoltaics in the way that we have. So, we are committed to doing the right thing. Ethan, it's really hard to ignore the analysis of farmland loss that's coming, that's already happening. So we're in the middle of the largest land transfer in our history because folks are wanting to retire and they don't want to lose their land, or they want to make sure that they're comfortable in their retirement as they deserve. So, and solar is one part of that conversation. And so we don't want to make it, we don't want to exacerbate the problem of farmland loss. So we've really adopted and pivoted to AgPV, and think it's, especially in land constrained states like Maryland. And one thing I did want to point out about why Maryland feels the pressure of solar, particularly on farmland, and in concentrated areas. One of the first things that we look at when we're evaluating folks' sites is grid capacity. And so that's very specific. County policymakers, rightly so, want to make sure that they're making really good policies and decisions, and oftentimes mapping farmland. And that's helpful, but also takes a lot of land off of the table already when we talk about what the utility grid can handle and what is cost prohibitive a lot of the times to site solar. So that's why our process is, after determining that your site is near load and it won't break the bank when we need to interconnect this project to the grid, we walk you through the next steps of development. And oftentimes in Maryland, it's about a 24-month process from signing a lease to seeing it turned on. So it's a slow development process. Typically across the rest of the United States, it's 12 to 18 months, but Maryland has some extra hoops to go through regulatorily, and you know, that's okay. We're in it for the long haul, and we're a very patient company, so we try to keep that in mind. So with a site assessment, we'll discuss kind of what you see on your land, your needs, your future needs, you know, trying to flesh those out as best as possible, and preferences for where you'd like the project sited and where the best chance is. And oftentimes it is on areas that are prime soil, because you would want to give the farmer the correct tool to have the best chance of growing crops. So, you know, oftentimes we get asked about marginal land for agrivoltaics, but I don't think anybody really wants to be under array with marginal soil. So that's one thing to point out. Then we create a timeline. I talked a little bit about that, but one of the most important parts about the permitting process is, you know, it's not required sometimes by, you know, local authorities, but Lightstar always creates a farm plan within NRCS certified conservation soil planner and our agricultural consultant, because we need to not only make sure that the farm remains in compliance and in active agriculture, but we need to help the farmer and the town understand that, you know, we know what we're doing. We're going to do this together, and this is what you can expect. So I talked a little bit about compliance there. This is a compliance mechanism for us to file it with the town, so that they know that we're not just pulling the wool over their eyes about putting a farm in the ground, or a solar farm in the ground, and calling it agrivoltaics. So and another way that we kind of help to ensure that the farm is actually being productive, and of course there's, you know, when there's an extreme drought, when there's crop loss, things like that, there's hail, you know, all of that, you know, we account for that in our contracts and in our farm plans, and folks understand that this is, yes, it's solar, but it's also primarily agriculture. So things happen. So we have lease payments. If you are the landowner, you get paid the lease payments. And if you have a tenant farmer, you also are paid a stipend quarterly to keep farming the property. This is because, first of all, we believe that farmers should be paid for the work that they're done, that they do on their land. And then also it's to ensure that, you know, we have a contract between the tenant farmer or the farmer landowner to keep the farming, and also to learn, you know, it's a learning curve to farm these projects. So that is also part of our process. So what is agrivoltaics? I kind of just mentioned that. You know, we design all of our projects to have as full of integration of agriculture or horticultural production and solar on the same parcel. So that means in and around the arrays. You know, we have selected specific racking types that are typically about 7.5 feet, 7 to 7.5 feet above the ground. The German guidelines are at least 6 feet. So we feel that that's a really great height for us. And then also, you know, the row spacing, there's about 28 to 32 feet, depending on each specific site between rows, which is enough for a lot of farm equipment, not everything, not huge, you know, combines, but we can talk about that a little later too. You know, because you're doing an agrivoltaics array and we're permitting it as such at the county level and the local level, it will remain in agricultural production through the life of the project. And that's something that we take really seriously. We acceptable agricultural use, you know, a Lightstar and AFT and Farm Bureau have been talking about this, but in other states, our experience has been tying to acceptable and permitted agricultural use currently in statute is the easiest way to help policymakers understand what's possible and what should be possible. I think there's some industry folks on here that would be mad at me when I say that grazing for maintenance twice a year is not considered full agrivoltaics. That's just sustainable O&M. So this is not that. If you are, you know, creating revenue from this piece of property from your flock, and livestock products, then yes, that is agrivoltaics. But just coming in and mowing the grass with sheep twice a year is not necessarily at least what Lightstar is getting at here. So, and I mentioned a stipend is paid to the farmer for the life of the project to ensure that there's agricultural activity and support farm viability, which is really the key here for that. Making sure that there's stable, predictable, long-term income, so you can take those risks, you can pivot to a certain type of farming. One of the examples we have in New Jersey is we have a hog farmer. He runs hogs, and he wants to retire. He doesn't want to stop farming, but his daughter wants to keep farming, but doesn't want to farm hogs, and so he sees this as a way to pivot to vegetable farming. It's less intensive. He's an upstanding hog in the state, but it's a lot to keep up the certification and requirements of that. So, that's a prime example of why this farmer stipend is really important, and that's also an NREL recommendation from the 5 Cs that Ethan has mentioned. So, with that. Everybody, top questions that we get asked are, what works and how are you going to stay into compliance? And so I've talked a little bit about the compliance and happy to talk about it a little more later, but, we've got there is a body of research over the last 10 years from all over the world and in the US. There's been a body of research being formed about what works, what doesn't, how it benefits some crops. And the latest one at the top was done in Europe, and they published it last May, and they had actually used an artificial array that was some of it was cloth, some of it was wood, a lot of it was a lot less transparent than some of the panels that we use day to day. And they saw that fruiting crops, and that's not just berries but tomatoes and more, benefited from up to 40% shade, and they produced more there. And that was a really interesting finding and kind of good to hear. And then tomatoes from out of our friend Byron Gaffer down in Arizona. Research will be peer reviewed and published, but they had initially found that tomatoes in particular increased their yield under the arrays compared to open fields. And I think folks can understand about, water usage and all of that kind of stuff. So, and then we have peppers, broccoli, kale, and Swiss chard, just to name a few, saw the same or greater yield despite a very hot summer in 2017. So this is what we base our kind of our understanding of why we wanted to move forward with agrivoltaics. We know that something can work, and you'll hear a lot more from Jack Solar Garden, which is where this beautiful, beautiful picture comes from, and their experience so far to date with the variety of crops that they've seen. So just a little touch, I'm running low on time. So, what's happening in Maryland, and why are we so interested in AgPV here? Last session, we saw a tax exemption bill for personal property tax and to remain in farmland assessment to incentivize AgPV, but that's only a pilot program since. And so I don't think that we will see any projects take advantage of that, but it's a good start. For a number of reasons, there's capacity constraints around that program. So I'm not sure we'll make it, but we're trying. And then there's pending legislation to further define agrivoltaics and allow for co-location of projects to incentivize them while keeping ratepayer impact low, which is super important to us too, if we're going to expand AgPV at scale. And then MEA is also exploring incentives through their innovative open space program. And the counties, which are really important and key in Maryland for not only solar development, but farmland protection. So they're exploring how they can both secure farmland and then also meet their need for clean energy, local cost saving clean energy, and we think community solar and the expansion of the program will help do that. So here's what everybody wants to see. What do these look like? What is this going to look like? So this is a rendering of one of our projects in Baltimore County, 16 acres, 3 megawatts. It's the Phillips family, and they are long-term landowners. And they have a tenant farmer that has been farming the property since the beginning, since they purchased the property. So this is, family on family on family stuff, and they want to see and pivot to new. They have a really great partnership, which is super exciting to be able to be invited into that relationship with them. So, they're looking to pivot to market row crops. They want stability, they want the variety. This is what the family and the next generation are really looking to do. So, and they see that AgPV can help them do that. You can see, I had mentioned this is 7.5 feet tall, 28 feet between rows, 16 feet between panel edges. Equipment and the fences are set back. It depends on what the site looks like, but typically we want to make sure that the tractor and the implements can navigate the rows seamlessly without running into the agricultural fence. So, and that agricultural fence is 8 feet high. I don't know if anybody on call has problems with wildlife and crop damage due to that, but this will be around all of our projects, and a lot of the farmers that we work with see this as a real positive. So, still working through the details of that. This is very early days. We're talking to the county about it, and we look forward to engaging the local community about what this looks like and what they can expect. So, like I said, this is by no means a done deal, but this is what we hope something could look like way up in Freeland up there. So. Then we've got our Montgomery, New York project. This is actually the first, one of the first projects in New York that we actually had worked with the town and the county to change ordinances to allow for agrivoltaics. Previously, this town had a ban on solar development on prime soils, but they also wanted to act on climate and bring clean low-cost energy to the town. So we worked with them to change the bylaw, and within reasonable bylaw change, and allows us to develop here and properly screen and set back and all of that. So this is the DiMartino family, and they've got, historically, they've done hay on the property. Again, they've got that younger generation that are wanting to take over and looking for that stability and that ability to pivot or transition to vegetables if they'd like to. And pumpkins are big in that area, because New York City folks like to come up and pick. So they're thinking about pumpkin production too. So again, this is the same configuration. Is yet to be determined if it's going to be will all be single axis trackers. So that means that the panels move with the motion of the sun, the position of the sun. So it's not just a static shadow, which is what makes agrivoltaics kind of work under single axis tracking. So we are really excited about this project. It's currently in permitting, and so stay tuned, see how that comes out. And so there's lots of resources, and talking about how did I train our company to get involved. We did a lot of research. We did a lot of internal meetings, did field trip out to Jack's Solar Garden so we could drink the Kool-Aid out there. So I'm gonna stop here because I want to toss it to Byron, because he's got lots more to say and really interesting stuff. So that's us. And if you have any questions, feel free, email us at land@lightstar.com for any Farm Bureau members, and anybody else interested in policy, my contact information is there. So thanks so much for your time.
Thank you, Lucy. We'll move over to Byron. Let you kick it off and tell us about what you guys are doing in Colorado.
Thanks, Colby. Thanks, Lucy. Good to hear from you there too. Well, morning from Colorado. I'm the owner manager of Jack's Solar Garden, as I mentioned. You want to go ahead and hit that next slide. We're a 1.2 megawatt community solar garden in Colorado. And Lucy's about to play a 4-minute long video that helps to showcase everything that we have going on out here. So I'll be quiet and let you all watch this video. My understanding is society only has two things. We have our people and we have our land. When we develop solar arrays, we need to keep our land functional because that's part of our society. traditional solar installations, the land is a detriment because it potentially can grow vegetation that might shade the solar panels. And if it shades the panels, then that's less electricity it produces. So they hire people to go in and mow it or spray that land and keep that land degraded over time. A different way of doing it is by elevating the panels so that you can have solar above agriculture. Agrivoltaics is agriculture and photovoltaics smashed together to make agrivoltaics. The solar panels provide that shade, that microclimate for crops to be able to grow in, and it makes it easier for people to be within that space or for tractors to be within that space. Agrivoltaics has so many wins involved with it.
We are seeing a mutually beneficial relationship between the solar panels and the vegetation. As temperatures get too hot, many plants shut down their photosynthetic activities throughout the middle part of the day. The partial shade from the panels allows that photosynthesis to continue occurring throughout the growing day. The plants actually create a cooler microclimate underneath the panels. That cooler microclimate creates higher efficiencies and higher output. The cooler conditions underneath the panels lead to less evaporation of water from the soil. That allows us to reduce the amount of supplemental water we give for irrigation, which in some cases could be half as much water to achieve the same yields. So what this means is that instead of vegetation serving as a barrier to solar development, it actually can lead to lower O&M costs for managing, as well as higher panel efficiencies leading to more clean energy production.
Jack Solar Garden is the largest commercial research site for agrivoltaics in the U.S. 3,276 panels, producing enough clean energy for about 300 homes in our area.
We're growing at least 15 different varieties of crops, everything from salad greens to cooking greens to root veggies. We were really excited to make use of the space under the solar panels because it has historically just been sitting there unused, and to be able to work in the shade in the middle of the day. I think that could have really long-term benefits for farm worker health. We feel like there's so many benefits. Reduced water, the plants will do better because of the microclimate created by the panels. The farmers have a better time because they're not in the sun all day. That we're using the land for food production instead of it just sitting there vacant. And it'll all be funneled back to the local community, including donations to food pantries, CSA programs, and also some farmers markets. It might be win-win-win.
We want to show our community that there's a different way that we can have solar energy being produced across our country, that it doesn't have to be how it's always been.
The potential is boundless. Everywhere people live, they need energy and they need food.
The insights we're gaining here will inform development not only in Colorado, but also throughout the country and throughout the world.
We need bigger change, and we need it from our policymakers, we need it from the solar developers, we need it from landowners. Thanks, Lucy. And that video is public. It's on YouTube. If you go to jacksolargarden.com, you'll be able to find that video there and have a look at it again or share it around with other folks. I was asked to share a little bit more about the genesis of this, why we decided to go down the path of putting a solar array on our land and some of the challenges that went around with doing so. Our 24 acres of farmland was purchased by my grandpa Jack here. That's the taller fella on that far left side. I like to tell people he was born in 1895. He was a land tenant on other people's lands for probably about 30 years of his life, and then moved on to owning his own property down in Westminster, just above Denver, for about 40 years, where my mother grew up, who's on that little tractor there. And then he bought our 24 acres of land in 72 to retire on, to grow hay, sell back into the community. And he passed away in 1980. Our land's been in my family for 50 years. I moved out here in 2016 and need to learn what else to do with our land. Next, please. So got around to learning more about haying and how it doesn't pay much at all. So those little square bales that you see there, about 60 pounds worth of hay. Out in Colorado, I can max out typically selling them around $10 a bale. If I produce my maximum amount of 1,000 bales on my farmland over the course of the season, max revenue $10,000. Our property tax is $3,500. Water rights is $2,000. All of our utilities about $1,500 a year. Upkeep of all the equipment due is $1,000. There goes all our hay money. Why bother haying our land? Doesn't make sense. I needed to figure out how to make a living on it. So I went to our local government. Well, some folks might not do that. I used to serve in the federal government. So I went down to the county office and asked them what else could we do with our land. They came up with, oh, everybody loves free range chickens. I could have 5,000 of them. And I didn't really want to chase 5,000 chickens. They mentioned, we could do a Christmas tree farm. And I didn't really want to wait 10 years before I could start having any revenue. Or we could have an equestrian center on our property, and we don't really have barn space for housing a ton of horses. So we would have to put in a massive capital investment up front, and then nobody's really riding horses to the farmers market anymore. So the number of horses that we could fill that space with would be limited. And I had a friend in the solar industry that mentioned, our land's really flat. We're next to a 3-phase line. We should look into doing solar. So took that idea to the county and asked them, how about we put solar array on our land? You all want to be 100% renewable one day. We need to make a little extra money. Let's sort this out. And they said, no, farmland's for farming. So go get on it. And well, that was a little frustrating at the time. This was in 2017. And I mentioned, we are using the sunlight for growing hay that I'm not eating at night. I'm selling that into the community as a commodity product. Why can't I use the sunlight to generate electricity that's a commodity that I also sell into the community? Let's figure this out. So over the course of about a year, you can click the next one. We worked with Boulder County to update their land use code so that we could actually build it out on our solar array. So this was at the end of 2018 that they changed their land use code to allow us to put a solar array on our farm. And it wasn't a land use code just for us. It was a land use code because of us, but it allows well over 50 other farms in our small county that are adjacent to 3-phase lines that could also do something similar to what we've done here. At the same time, you can click the next one. We needed to win a bid with Xcel Energy. They are the local utility, and we needed to get their blessing to be able to build a solar array. So basically a month after each other from getting the county to change their land use code, we won a bid from Xcel to be able to interconnect up to a 1.2 megawatt community solar garden into their area. And what a community solar garden is basically, I don't have to sell my electricity wholesale to the utility, which is great because they'd pay a penny per kilowatt hour, which would destroy the project. And that's just ridiculous. But I could sell it individually to, I have over 50 residents that are subscribers to us, 2 local governments, and 5 local companies that have decided to subscribe to us to support us being able to put in, to generate local clean energy and to supply it to our local community. We do produce enough power, as that video said, that could handle about 300 homes in our area. It's over 2 gigawatt hours per year that we produce. And we're able to learn more about growing crops and working with researchers underneath our solar panels, as you saw in that video. Next slide, please. During this process, we also had to get a special land use justification and approval. So first we had to change the land use code. Then we had to win a bid with Xcel Energy. Then we had to go back to the county to get a special land use just for our property to do this. And we got that in the middle of, I think, July of 2019, before we could really move forward with contracting somebody to build the solar array. Then I wanted to mention a few of the issues that came up during this whole special land use review process. Was one, dealing with the fire department. We had a fire department, or county requires fire department plus all these other departments to check off on that there's no issue with us building a solar array on this property or how we were designing to do it. And fire department originally wanted us to pave a road through the middle of our solar array and then pave a road all the way around it too, which would have significantly reduced the size of our solar array significantly increased the cost and significantly reduced the viability of having it out there. So after weeks of trying to work with our fire department, I finally contacted another fire department whose fire marshal had allowed for a solar array to go in without all that pavement, to talk to the other fire marshal, and we got it sorted out. Our public health department also needed, since this is on my family's farm, they wouldn't allow us to build our solar array until we upgraded our septic tanks. And so that was kind of a ridiculous thing, because we have a porta-john for people that come out and visit us or that work on the land versus septic tank that's just for our household. But that got dealt with. And then neighbors, a lot of folks get pushed back from having solar developments near their homes. And I went about it of going around to all my neighbors, sending them letters, handing out honey, getting people to come out to my land and explaining to them the project. So it was upfront before the project was built, like a year plus before the project was built, of getting my neighbors to understand what my vision was here and their concerns, and working through it versus ignoring the neighbors, trying to go push through the project through the county without talking to any of the neighbors and getting a whole bunch of pushback. So I had over 20 neighbors send in letters of support, whereas I only had 2 neighbors that declined to support us, and they were against the project going in. But both of them said that they wanted renewable energy, just not next to their house. They were concerned that it would increase traffic on their by their homes, or one also said that it would be noisy, but it wasn't. So we're done with that one. All resolved. On to the next slide, please. So what we did was hire a local solar developer to put in, these are over 2,000 steel piles that were between 17 and 21 feet long, I believe. I think that was, no, between 16 and 20 feet long. Yep. Click the next one. And they helped us build this solar array that we're about to, or that you were seeing during the video. And this is how they went about it. So you can see how tall those gentlemen are adjacent to that, those panels. Those panels, when they're flat, that is about 8 foot high. So we had about a third of our 4 acres of solar panels at the 8 foot when they're flat. And when they fully tilt, they get down to 6 feet tall. And then on the other 2/3 of our land, we had it so that the panels were flat at about 6 feet. And then when they fully tilt down, they get down to about 4 feet. As a 6'4" fella, I far prefer the 8 foot height, so that when it's fully tilted, I just have to duck my head a little bit to get underneath the panels versus the 4 foot one where I go and start doing the limbo. All of the people that have been out working on our fields for the past few years, because we were built in 2020, so we've had 2 growing seasons. Everybody complains about the lower height of the panels, and everybody wants it to be taller because it's so much easier ergonomic for people to transition between one row of panels to the next to check on different crops. Next slide, please. So we turned this hay field, that's an 8-acre field, click that, and we put within the middle of it 4 acres of solar panels. That's what it looks like. All of it's single axis tracking, so it follows the sun east to west. It's 17 foot on center, which is roughly standard for a utility scale system. So the only thing we changed for putting these solar array out on our land was elevating the panels up higher. Thankfully, Namaste Solar also had really clean wire management. We asked them to reduce soil compaction by having designated areas where they would drive their vehicles. And all of that helped us be able to have vegetation and people within the system. Next, please. Click it again. And so this allows us to have all this space for use. We've had parties with 100+ people, crops growing, and my voice is giving out. I'm getting over a cold. Apologies. So we'll go ahead and click on to the next one. And this helps us showcase the future of agrivoltaics. With animals, click it again. Where we have chickens that wander out there, click it again. And cattle without in this the system. This is underneath our 8 foot tall panels. When you have good forage, the cows don't care anything about the solar array. They just want to eat. And this is where I think the future of it is. And that was the big old team. Go ahead, click it again. And that's the team of folks that are supporting us with it, from University of Arizona, National Renewable Energy Laboratory, Colorado State University, Sprout City Farms, and our Colorado Agrivoltaic Learning Center. Thanks.
Thank you, Brian. Byron, there was a question I'm not going to put Byron on this one, but I do want to come back to Lucy. There was a good question, I think, was just sprouted from this discussion here, and it's talking about for privately financed projects, like a community solar project in which there's active farming underneath. Who is responsible for the various liabilities, whether it be the damage to the equipment, damage to the farming equipment, damage to the crops, liability for personal injury? How do you guys do those contracts and negotiate the liability?
Here we go.
Yeah.
Actually, Byron probably has way more like direct information about how like insurances and liabilities work on his actual farm, because I'm just a policy dum-dum. But so I mean, we're working that out with our financiers and stuff like that. But Byron definitely has way more to say about that, so I'll kick it to him if you don't mind.
We got general liability, umbrella liability on our panels for in case anybody gets injured by the solar array system. I have property insurance on it, and then our farmers and the other folks that are out there, I require them to have up to $1 million per occurrence for general liabilities for anybody else being injured or damaging our system. I've told the farmers, look at like we only have O&M teams come out there once every 6 months to work on any issues, and typically they can just walk out on the field, drive up at the south side of our land and just walk out to a space, or we have a driving space around the outside that they can get to a spot easier. So that like most of the things that they would have to do is if a panel fails and they just pick up the panel and walk out, they can walk in between the crops. We do our annual performance review during the winter time when there are no crops out there, so it's easier for the folks to be able to walk around, the O&M team to walk out there. But if there is significant damage to the solar array, I've told the farmers, look at like it's first and foremost, the way that we make money to allow them to be out on our land is by generating electricity. If there's a major damage to the solar array for any purpose, then we will have to drive over the crops to be able to get to it. That's how we handle it on our land, but folks can also do it differently elsewhere.
All right, thanks, Byron. All right, we're going to switch. I've got another question for you, but I'm going to give you a chance to kind of get a drink of water and get your voice back to you. But I do want to switch to Nick Armentrout to give us a perspective of grazers and how it works on his operation up in Maine. So, Nick, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Colby. There we are. Thanks everybody. Glad to be here with you all today. So as I mentioned earlier, I'm wearing a hat for the American Solar Grazing Association, for which I've been a board member the last few years. It's a fantastic little group. And so a lot of the information I'll present is from that. But I do also do some work off of my farm with solar developers around the Northeast in particular, and we graze a number of different sites, which I can speak to also. Just a real quick background piece. I worked in the wool industry, the US wool industry, for about 10, 11 years. And when I left that job, I was here in Maine, and I was driving home from being in the western mountains of the state, and I passed a well-known farm that had been a organic dairy for a lot of years. Everybody sort of knew it, and they processed a lot of commission grain processing for other farmers so they could meet organic certifications. And I had not been paying attention to what was going on that farm. And when I drove by it, was covered with solar racking, and it blew my mind. I just had not appreciated that this was happening on this farm. About a 350, 400 acre project, and that's big for Maine for solar. And I got home and I started knocking on doors and asking questions, what was going on here. And along the way, I learned about the American Solar Grazing Association and sheep being used on solar sites. And this is something I recognized because sheep have been used by producers in the US industry as a resource management tool for a long time. And it's really a form of targeted grazing that pastoralists and people well before those of us on this call for generations have been using the animal impact to control and manage resources. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that today. Next slide, please. So just a high level view here. When solar sites are put in, they are the developers in construction, they are required to vegetate those sites to stabilize the soils as an erosion control, stormwater control. So these have to be seeded and planted. In early days, it was not uncommon to see just gravel or really shallow rooted turf grasses. But over time, as more professionals have become involved, there may be, in fact, even pollinator plantings like the Maryland Department of Natural Resource pollinator habitat requirement, and plants that need management so that they don't shade the panels and affect output and energy output. We're still learning quite a bit about the dynamic nature of water and how it functions on a solar site coming off those impervious solar panels, and the importance of these areas of disconnection, open land between the rows. As I go through my report, you'll see I've got resources embedded, and then there'll be a resource page at the end that I'll highlight. Next slide, please. So challenges to operations and maintaining that vegetation. This is a real hodgepodge of pictures, but all giving you some examples that, site maintenance on these larger sites as they get bigger over time is time consuming. It's difficult to find the needed labor. It's critical that, the cost to maintain these sites are kept low in order to avoid price hikes to consumers buying their power, and investors who've put up the money to generate, to construct and operate these facilities. Not only mechanical control is expensive, but they can cause a significant amount of damage. So some of the pictures here show that. In the lower left corner, there's a broken panel because mowers will throw rocks, and even string trimmers, they'll scatter little bits of gravel. A lot of machinery in the site, depending on where it is in that process of revegetating the orchard floor. Machines can throw a lot of dust and dirt, and they will soil the panels, which impacts productivity. At times, if there's difficulty managing the site, herbicides may be introduced as a way to control vegetation. I think some of the back to that previous slide. Thank you. One last thing is there's a picture here of a landfill cap that's being grazed. Some of the very locations that are promoted as smart solar siting, disturbed areas and brownfields and landfill caps can be really difficult to access. So mechanical controls aren't always feasible. Thanks. Next slide. So sheep are a natural solution to put into these solar sites. They help, manage the vegetation and keep it from shading modules. They can be introduced for fire fuel load, particularly in more brittle environments like out west in California, where it may actually not be having sheep populate a residential flock living in the site all year long. They may come in for a short duration to remove veg as part of fuel load control. Sheep can really work in conjunction with the rest of the habitat that's trying to be nurtured inside the site, that including pollinator plantings and native grasses. And they certainly can help to lower operations and maintenance costs. Certainly, 30%, but we've seen some developers cited down in the footnote here, seeing savings in costs over 60%. And that's because they're accounting for damages that mechanical mowers and string trimmers may cause to the site that sheep and livestock do not. And I've gone as far to say that sheep are essential because we're going to need to be able to keep our costs low while we're transitioning from some of our traditional fuels to renewable. What I sort of jumped over quickly is let's go to the next slide. Actually, I might be able to touch on it there. Yeah, here we go. So here's just a couple of images. Top left site is in Pennsylvania, Franklin County. Top right site's in Mid-Coast, Maine. Then we've got some Vermont and New York sites down below, Massachusetts and New York sites down below. So in these larger sites with these tracking panels, you'll see drive shafts and cab cabling and wiring going between and connecting the module rows. Some early sites, this may have been buried over time as these sites are being, the rapid fire development of these sites. A lot of this cabling connectivity and drives, out of necessity in the case of the drives, are now above ground. So it's very difficult to easily throw machinery between these rows and maintain it without a lot of travel, a lot of time, and a lot of labor. You can see down below how where in the top left we've got wires and drives, and in the lower left you see sheep just walking right underneath it. In the top right side you've got some fixed tilt panels on stilts and racking with guy wires, and then similarly in the lower right you've seen sheep just comfortably grazing and eating and resting right below those. That would be very difficult to go through with a string trimmer. It's done, but it's quite time consuming. Next slide, please. So sheep are a great fit for solar sites with little to no modification. We would like to see a great deal more modification in time to make these true, sheep farming sites. But one of the reasons you are seeing sheep versus beef or dairy or llamas or horses or whatever it may be, low-line cattle even, is that they're the easiest to deploy. So this is just a quick shot at some pricing from the National Renewable Energy Laboratory that's looking at the most affordable. This is from 2020, the most affordable construction as a fixed PV in the purple, and then blue and gold right above that are PV and pollinator habitat, and PV and grazing as the most cost competitive. Next slide, please. So what is the solar grazing opportunity? It's using animal impact as a strategy to manage vegetation for improved soil stability, health, and function at solar arrays. And it really needs to be all those things. It's not just a few animals stocked in the site, walking around, eating what they fancy and nothing more. Can you go back, please? Thank you. And solar grazing, again, it is a newer version of what we would consider targeted grazing. There's a nod at the bottom of the page to what the National Targeted Grazing Guide looks like and reads like. And solar grazing is also a form of prescribed grazing, which NRCS recognizes as their conservation practice standard number 528. So this is a known practice that's being applied to solar facilities, renewable energy facilities. Next slide, please. Okay, so the picture on the left, we've all happily plugged in pictures from the UMass Amherst agrivoltaic research site, which is awesome. That's what this picture here is on the left. As a wool and a fiber guy, I wanted to make a point of saying, the focus that we're putting on food production in solar is just absolutely hands down necessary. No doubt about that. But farms grow more than just food. We grow fiber on farms, and we grow alternative fuels as well. And right now, we're just not dedicating enough time and research to livestock and fiber production on farms. I've cited a study on the lower left-hand corner, which is a study of agrivoltaic studies. While there were 62 different research projects identified, only 2 focused at all on livestock and grazing. So we are hoping that some of the funding that's coming from the USDA partnerships for climate smart commodities, for instance, being sent to organizations like the National Center for Appropriate Technology, could you go back, please? Thank you. In conjunction with partners like FiberShed, American Solar Grazing Association, American Sheep Industry Association. We're hoping that sort of starts to affect some change. But we absolutely have to consider fiber. And so even when there are animals grazing in a site, and that may or may not at first blush appear like agrivoltaics, let's not forget that we can grow our clothes from animals that are grazing solar. It's a blustery day here today, and I'm covered with wool, and I'll be sleeping under wool tonight. So fiber is a big part of it. Next slide, please. Thanks. And here to that end are just some examples from some of our producers and American Solar Grazing members. Top left is right down the road from Byron. That's Craig Scariot out in Longmont, Colorado, grazing. And then the top right side, that's Massachusetts. Lower left is Julie Bishop. She grazes a number of different DG sites, including those for some institutions in New Jersey. And lower right side is an operator in California, that Ryan Indart, that he's grazing over 15,000 acres for a number of different producers. And he's in a brittle environment, as you can tell in these images. So there's a whole different bundle of considerations between his operation and others. But these sheep are an integral part to the functioning of these solar facilities. Next slide, please. Okay, so it shouldn't be that while it's simple to deploy sheep, and it's fantastic that they're an easy way to start to integrate some ag enterprises with the solar. We want to see over time the sites developed more thoughtfully for those sheep in mind ahead of time versus throwing sheep in afterwards. We'll take it for now. It's a great opportunity. But as time goes on and development continues, we want to see some real thought put to it. And, well thought solar sites absolutely offer protection for the stock grazing in them. That decreases stress. It's just a much more placid environment. That can have an impact on quality of meat production, quality of fiber production. It's being suggested that can have an impact on quality of milk production. That's being researched at an arm of the University of Minnesota. Folks in Australia are interested in the quality of wool. And from a husbandry standpoint, the solar sites, that low stress protected environment can also perhaps be a real humane pasture, depending on how much time and design is put into the fencing and the designs of the site. I think in the future, it will be important for us to start to account for the quality of the animal products, including food and fiber, in our life cycle analyses of some of those. Yeah, next slide, please. I slipped this in this order. It could have been a lot earlier. This is making mention of some of the deliberate seeding and that happens in these solar sites. The picture on the left actually is a working example of the seed mix on the right side that was developed with Ernst Conservation Seed and the American Solar Grazing Association. It's lovingly referred to as the Fuzz and Buzz seed mix, and you can see what it is there. But there are others in the region, especially around Maryland, King Ag Seeds, and boy, I also recognize some others on the Maryland Department of Natural Resource list of companies for seed resources. The hope is that these sites are seeded ahead of construction, so that they can really be stabilized as quickly as possible when operations are going, and they then become grazable and available for livestock to enter soon after completion of the site. I want to give a shout out because I did go to college a long time ago on the Eastern Shore, and one of the resources there on the Eastern Shore is the Natural Lands Project that's part of the Washington College Center for Environment and Society, and they are a grant funded program that works with farmers to help reseed marginal farmland to natural habitat and help protect watershed quality in the Chesapeake Bay. And so they're an awesome resource in conjunction with outfits like Ernst Seeds for seeding and working to stabilize and create beneficial habitat around these solar facilities. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is kind of a scary map, but I think it's kind of cool too. So this is from the Solar Energy Industries Association on the left, and it's tracking the project status of solar from 1 up to 100 megawatts. And this is ground mount solar. And so you can see this was, I believe it's August 2022. So you can see the kind of activity that's going on. It's quite substantial. And then on the right side, this is a map that we've put together, overlaying the SEIA map of solar grazers. So if you go to the American Solar Grazing site, you can see not only where the facilities are in yellow, but grazers who are available and wanting to access solar sites in green. And then there are other supporters and enthusiasts, and somehow those involved with the industry in red and orange. So American Solar Grazing has been doubling in size every single year. We're an organization of farmers and grazers and researchers and solar developers and supporters, over 500 members, 36 US states. It's a really fantastic resource with monthly webinars that are a wonderful way. People were asking about training. We have a lot of developers who are members and get logins for a significant number of their staff, so they can immerse themselves in all the stuff that's happening in the front lines of research and what's going on in solar sites. We are also a partner with the AgriSolar Clearinghouse, which I think Ethan also made mention to. Next slide, please. Yeah, I glossed over something in the background there, the top of that last slide. That kind of growth has the potential to start to create and rebuild markets. So when you see the opportunity that when the thinking and the designing and the collaborating comes together right, there really is an opportunity to grow and scale agriculture and start to influence markets. So, Maryland, I don't have to tell the producers on this call that you have, fantastic proximity to markets. As far as utility scale solar goes, it's starting to grow, but there's only, of the 86 different installations, that's again information from the SEIA. It may be, plus or minus, but of those 86 installations that are operating at all scales in Maryland, only one was grazed, one utility scale site was grazed in 2022. So that was the Great Bay Solar site that's in Somerset County, south of Salisbury. They had about 650 or so sheep on that site last year, which had to come from Virginia and Texas. And they had to come in and get quarantined and have some health checks and some settling out in New Jersey before making their way into Maryland. There just aren't enough sheep in the country. But, Maryland's the host of, I think it's this year, the 50th anniversary of the Maryland Sheep and Wool Festival. So there's a tradition there. There are sheep people there, but we need to try to get match some of those resources and grow some of the capability to graze sites, particularly in Maryland, because you've got proximity to some phenomenal markets. Go ahead. Next slide, please. Thank you. So I am not going to be the professional or the subject matter expert on all of the viability that solar on farm can bring. There's a much better study to cite for that. It's a superior study the Institute for Energy and Environmental Research that put together a report on exploring farming solar synergies using Maryland data. And it was looking at a couple of different scaled operations. It was looking at solar on 10% or less of the farm. So it was 3 models. It was leasing 100 acres of a 1,000-acre crop farm to solar. It was an owned, the other model was an owned 16-acre solar site on a 300-acre dairy. And the last one was a 1-acre owned site on a 10-acre crop farm. And in all circumstances, the additional revenue from the solar gave a lift, added profitability to the overall farm income, and was not subject to the vicissitudes of changing commodity markets, and allowed for some steady investment in the farming operation. So I think the message there is, it's not all good solar on farmland, but it's not all bad either. And a key point of the report from IEER, which is a fantastic report, I really can't say enough about it, is that it's advocating for there to be a broad dispersal of generation, that it not be, let's put all the solar on all the big farms. Instead, let's have, again, smaller, 10% less production on a lot of different farms. In that way, it's advocating for equity, that a lot of different producers have the opportunity to host generation and improve the profitability of their operations. So fantastic report. It's in the resources and I highly recommend it. Next slide, please. This is just a little peek, again, giving a nod to the idea of proximity to markets. This is tracking in the black lamb sales at some of the bigger auction houses in Colorado, South Dakota, and Texas through let me see, October, 2022. And then in the red, the New Holland auction stable in Pennsylvania, pretty close to you all there in Maryland. And while the market shows a dip, no doubt, and updated information is available about the Livestock Market and Information Center. But while that market shows a dip, note the red line. That red line is the light lamb market. And so that light lamb market is 60 to 90 pound lambs that are outselling traditional 110, 130, sometimes more pound lambs. And that market is really driven by the East Coast. It's starting to grow and spread to places like Texas and Colorado, but it's really centered on the East Coast. And one of the hottest auction houses in the country is New Holland, Pennsylvania, to the point that a lot of Western producers were shipping in their wool lambs to sell through that auction house. So, that's up the road from you all. And, there's a lot of different ways to study that, think about it, and try to be part of that. Next slide, please. So these are the resources, and there's a bunch of them there. There's one that I didn't really highlight in one of my slides, but I want to absolutely call it out. And that's right in the middle of this resource list. They're all fantastic, but the one in the resource list, or I should say, I found them to be fantastic. The one in the middle is listed under Soil for Climate, the Hope Below Our Feet peer-reviewed publications on well-managed grazing as a means of improving rangeland ecology, building soil carbon, and mitigating global warming. It is a phenomenal list of curated research and peer-reviewed science that is showing the benefits of animals in an agricultural system for climate mitigation, for soil health, but absolutely they have to be well-managed animals. And we want to head in that direction so that it's not just animals wandering around and understocked and underperforming and not helping. We want to see them to be an asset to the land, and we want to see them to be an asset to solar sites. So we certainly believe that's the case. Thank you very much.
Nick, great job. We're kind of at the time. I think we kind of wanted to be at about an hour and a half, but there's some good questions here, and I don't want to let them go just because we're at a time frame. There's no hard block where we've got to be off of here. So I was hoping we could get to some of these questions. And Nick, the first one I see that I kind of wanted to shoot to you was a discussion on cattle. You talked about sheep quite heavily, but here in Maryland we have quite a few cattle producers, and there's been discussion of doing a lot of rotational grazing and farmers that are actually doing some rotational grazing with cattle. What's your assessment on that? Do you have to go with the taller, like the 8-foot panels, like Byron was talking about, or what's your recommendation if you're going to run cattle in these?
Yeah, I mean the recommendation, and it's still very much early days, Colby. Some of the work that's happened in UMass or in Massachusetts will be quite revealing. But yeah, I mean there has to be raised racking to allow the cattle to move underneath. The primary concern being rubbing and just interference with the racks. I referenced some work being done through the University of Minnesota. I highly recommend that. It's in my resource list. They're looking at quality of milk production. Maryland's not alone. There's lots of folks that really want to see beef and cattle underneath, to the point where there are a few developers who are even looking at some heritage or low-line cattle breeds to see if that's an answer. I mean, we have a lot of Dexters and Belted Galloways and some of these smaller genetics up here in New England, and perhaps they have a place. But raised racking is par for the course on cattle right now. But there's still a lot that remains to be seen. Yeah.
So the question I wanted to make sure I had put to you and Byron for sure is, I put farmers into two buckets. I think it's pretty similar the way that you can do the two buckets, and it's really just what I consider to be, not small and large or anything like that, or grain or livestock. It's that you've got farmers that are farming for money, and you have farmers that are farming with money. And so the ones that are farming for money are the ones that are living, that they got to sell their crop. That's what pays the mortgage. That's what puts their kids through school. That's what puts the food on the table. Versus the farming with money are the ones that have, like me, that have a full-time job and then utilize the farm almost as a tax write-off to help offset some of the cost of when you pay your taxes and stuff. And so obviously the ones that are farming with money have a much more flexible ability to implement things like this, because the generation of income is not paramount to their life, their daily life. But the ones that are farming that are doing it full time, I guess my question is, and Nick, you kind of alluded to it a little bit with your one chart that you had up there, but are you seeing that it is economically viable if you do the combination of the two, that the cost of installation or the leasing or whatever you have, the interconnection agreements, the things that you have, does it pay off? Does it actually show higher annual income to do the dual use versus just doing one or the other?
I'll speak on the grazing side and leave the cropping and veggies to Byron and others here. First thing, there are two additional resources I can point to. One is the budget section of the American Solar Grazing Association, and it has a study there that we were part of, looking at stocking a 1,000-acre site in New York State with 3,000 ewes or over 9,000 lambs, and it's an economic study in the area. The second one is really phenomenal spreadsheets and budgeting tools through the Maryland Small Ruminant page. Susan Schoenen developed these tools, and they're on the Maryland Small Ruminant page, and they're fantastic. And you can start to do some budgeting to include grazing fees, lamb sales, and wool. We are absolutely, Colby, seeing farmers add viability to their overall program, and that's because they're able to charge a grazing fee. So that can give a lift then, or that extra cash, that extra income means they've added an income stream from their animals. So it's not just lamb, it's not just wool if they're selling wool at all. It's also grazing or resource management, and that can make an absolute big difference. It can be the difference completely in running it or not. The site that I showed a picture in Pennsylvania, we actually work with an Amishman and his son. They are grazing that site full time. They quit their day jobs. They're grazing that site full time, and providing a comprehensive service, grazing and doing mechanical controls in that site for their livelihoods.
So really, you're saying that basically, if I do a normal community solar or utility solar, I just lease the ground to the solar company and get paid $500 an acre, $1,000 an acre, whatever the number is. But I don't generate any income off of that anymore. But if I do the dual use, I could potentially, instead of getting that lease fee for just giving them the land to use, I could actually get a grazing fee if I did the grazing side to kind of be the offset, and then make the cash money on the lambs at the end of the year.
It's possible. Not all, just to be clear, not all landowners who are leasing are also managing the site. That's not that I don't have a number on that, so I can't tell you how common that is or not. But with the developers that I work with in my other job, it's probably less than 50%. It might be less than 40%. There are plenty of landowners that are saying, you know, I'm done. I'm out. I use this for this process. Another farmer can come in and farm this site, but I don't want to farm this site. So, and our objective obviously is to keep it an ag in some form. But there are situations where the landowner is leasing to the owner operator, and they are also deriving an income from managing that site at some level. I mean, there are people that are just plowing snow, or there are people that get paid for seeding pre-construction because they're there, they have the drill and they've got the equipment. But it's not, there isn't, others on this call may know that, have a succinct answer, but I don't know a standard that X number of landowners that are leasing to developers also are getting their management fees. It's not common.
So do you think you could do something like a landowner decides they wanted to use solar, have been working with a farmer that's been renting the ground, lease the ground to for the solar rights, and then do the farmer basically get the rental rates or do whatnot with the solar company, and it kind of a three-way deal there where you don't have to own the land to be able to farm it, and but the landowner doesn't have to pick between, do I put solar on or I keep farming it or let the neighbor farm it. So you can do the two.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Byron, you want to?
We see that a lot with our landowners and farmers. You know, I think I mentioned that we have landowners, we have the folks who have had it in their family for a long time, but they don't farm the land. They have the tenant farmers. That's the exact example that we have in Baltimore County on one of our sites. And so, you know, the landowner gets the lease payment, but then also, you know, the tenant farmer family deserves a payment too. They deserve a stipend to benefit from so there is this kind of like three-way situation. And then it turns out that the landowner is going to then invest the lease payments into activating some of the other fallow sites that they've had, but they haven't had the money to be able to do it. So it is this kind of like widespread opportunity with this kind of stabilized income.
Yeah, on that opportunity side, think about if you have an older generation that's done farming and they put out a solar array on their land, and maybe they have hundreds of acres that they're putting underneath solar. It also provides an opportunity for younger farmers to access land that they wouldn't be able to otherwise afford. Or immigrant families that might be coming to our country that live in apartments but are used to being farmers or ranchers in other places. Now they have access to solar land because the farmer that owns that land doesn't want to do it anymore. They don't have to. Going back to your previous question, you know, I get a lot of questions from solar developers or landowners or government. Everybody wants to know, like, all right, dollars and cents, like how much more money am I going to make by putting sheep underneath this or vegetables underneath this or whatever else? There's no clear answer. Nobody can give you that 100%. Because it's going to go down to the farmer or the rancher or the market for that season of what science you're using or what art skills are you using. Because honestly, at like most professions, there's a level of science that goes in, and then there's a level of art that you have learned from doing it for decades. And maybe you have a crap farmer that goes out there and throws down seed at the wrong time of year, and then they have nothing to show for it. Or you have an amazing farmer that goes out there, they know when to throw down seed and they're able to grow a ton out of it. I'd kill that there's any clear answer on profit loss for agrivoltaics. It's going to really depend on every single situation. Maybe Lucy can talk to the one on lease rights. I know I was offered between $600 and $1,200 an acre a year to lease my land to a solar developer, and I said I'd just do it myself. But I'm hearing from other folks that they're getting lease offers between $1,000 to $2,000 an acre a year. And maybe you have say 50 acres that you're going to put underneath of it, you could have $50,000 of revenue just from leasing your land to a solar developer. And now you have that pot of money that you can decide, okay, maybe I'm going to invest half of this into getting some animals that I can also range out there, and the other half I'll live on. And then the next year you already have the animals out there and you can breed them. And then the next year you're also getting $50,000. So you can pocket that money. And then you also have your farm business going on. There's lots of different ways that it can work out. For vegetables, you know, it's so hard to give a difference between Colorado to the East Coast, because we also have a ton of irrigation equipment that we're throwing out there because it's dry. Y'all happen to have rain, which is nice. I wish we had more of that. So we have a lot more expenses that go in and along those lines that might decrease the overall profitability of having vegetables growing out on our land. But then we also, in comparison to other farms that might be irrigating every single day, we also only have to irrigate every other or every third day because of the shade underneath our panels. And we're seeing like our bok choy, our lettuces, our arugula are growing 2 to 3 to 4 times larger underneath our solar panels than outside. Our celery was, I think, a 300% increase from underneath the solar panels to outside of the solar array. These are things that farmers are going to have to learn about what it's like in their area, what crops they want to grow, and figuring out the proper time to seed as well as to harvest underneath the panels. Because I do believe that the shade underneath the solar panels also makes it so that the vegetables don't bolt as early. So then your harvest is also delayed a little bit longer. So maybe everybody else has already harvested, and then you harvest and you're able to sell when nobody else is selling. So hopefully you get a better markup on it. There's a lot of factors in here that there isn't any easy answer, but there's a lot of evidence pointing towards the favorability of incorporating a wide variety of agricultural activities within a solar array, dependent on how well that solar array is built.
And I agree. I think, we always affectionately say that here in Maryland, we farm at Metro's edge. So we're right up against the DC metro area. We've got a population density that can be looked at as a double-edged sword. We're fighting for the land use, but at the same time, we've got a ready-made market. And one thing that I see has just been huge over the last decade is the expansion in the viability of agritourism and bringing the people to the farm. And, that's going to be a niche that all of a sudden you've got solar panels and sheep grazing or cattle grazing. That's going to be the next nugget to get them to come out and do your farm stand or whatnot. And it could be an addition to an agritourism operation, the smaller scale. I don't ever see it being outside of maybe the grazing type option for the utility scale. I think the grazing makes sense because you can put it in a way that you can graze as you showed down in Salisbury. But for, doing a more intensified vegetable production where you got to try to somehow lay plastic and run drip irrigation and all that kind of stuff and do cultivations and stuff like that would be a little bit more difficult, obviously, with the panels in the way. So I think it's limitations on full scale agriculture, but I do think that there's definitely some options there. And the thing that I always say is that the solar panels don't need class 1 and 2 soils to produce energy. So why do we need to target the class 1 and 2 soils to put these solar panels on, unless they're going to dual purpose with a farming practice that needs those class 1 and 2 soils? So that's our biggest thing, is to say, hey, if you want to go agrivoltaics and you want to keep farming it, then use the good soils. But if not, use the marginal soils, which can produce, as long as there's no trees in the way, you should be able to produce just as much electricity. So
one thing, Colby, I want to jump on that you mentioned in grazing, but you also mentioned the type of, what are the heritage ag industries in Maryland? You guys, you might have a lot of beef and dairy, but you also have a lot of poultry too. So I don't know if how many folks on the call know about this outfit, Pasture Bird. It's a massive hen house that gets up and it walks across the field, and it's an innovation that nobody would have thought of 5-6 years ago. If poultry is an important part of the ag economy in Maryland, how can you adapt it to solar and agrivoltaics? We maybe haven't seen it yet. It may seem far-fetched, but it also may be worth attempting a pilot. That's the kind of stuff that I think state by state, Byron said it already, is, ag in his state isn't the same as Maryland, or it's not the same as Maine. So what does it look like in your state when you start to put together designs for agrivoltaics?
Absolutely. Hey, can I jump in on the agritourism side? We have over 1,000 people come out to visit our land every year. And this is only the first couple of years, so people are still hearing about us. And we charge folks for coming out. We also have events where we've had a fella come out with a banjo play out here. We charge people for that. We do a big old shindig at the end of the year where we cook up food from underneath the panels, charge people for that. Folks have decided they want to start having weddings out here. We did our first one last year. We got a next one out here. I can charge for a wedding venue. Just by having the solar array out there and being a niche thing, people are interested in seeing it. And there's not a lot of solar arrays in the area that actually welcome people out with a guided tour and talking about it. So if that's something that folks are interested in getting involved with, it's been really easy of having people out here. I mean, I've had over 2,500 people come out and have tours by me. And we're looking to double that in this coming year.
Colby, I wanted to just mention, going back to access to solar land and new and beginning farmers, this is going to be a real growth area for the land grant, ag schools and extension services. And clearly there's a lot of students out there who are interested in integrated climate strategies and work coming out of school, and opportunities to work on projects like Byron's, to be service providers to Lightstar and other companies that are really trying to forge the way. We're going to need that. And again, that's one of the areas of partnership that we're going to have with Rutgers, with the DOE grant, is developing a regional agrivoltaics extension network that will bring together University of Maryland, Cornell, Penn State, Rutgers, really have a brain trust around how we equip that workforce. So we have trained agrivoltaic specialists, folks who may not be able to afford land on their own, but are very interested in accessing land and being farming in that area.
Totally agree. Well, you guys, I totally appreciate you giving us a little extra time, and we're about 10 minutes over, almost 20 minutes over. So I did want to go ahead and wrap it up here and give everybody their Friday afternoon back. And but I really appreciate everybody. We are recording this, and we will send it out to everybody that registered for this, and then we'll also share it on our social media and put it on our website as well. So again, thank you guys very much for this. I doubt this will be the last time we have these discussions. I think the next one will be to build on this. This was kind of the 101. We'll need to start digging in, and I'm thinking about bringing University of Maryland Ag Law Initiative in and starting to really dig into contracts and liabilities and how those things need to be really ironed out, so a farmer doesn't get held, doesn't get lost in the shuffle and get the raw end of the deal. And I've heard the horror stories about early adopters and not writing them right, and somebody in the solar company filing bankruptcy, and the farmer's land was tied up in the bankruptcy. So we definitely don't want those kind of contracts. So yeah, anything that we can protect the farmer, but also help them be viable is what we're looking for. So any last little nugget that we missed, or are we good for Friday and we can move on, or what do you think?
I'll add a nugget.
Okay.
I'll jump right in on that. I can't stress enough how important the farmer producer voice is in this design and thinking and charting the course here. I mean, there are situations I've walked into solar sites, and you just, if a farmer had been involved, it might not have been set up that way. Right. Some of the best innovators and solutions people around are farmers. So their voices are super important. And Colby, I think it's great that you've organized this for Maryland Farm Bureau to spend some time thinking about it.
Nick, just to piggyback on that, because that's what we've learned as a developer, is that trust the farmers. And, that's where we've really partnered with AFT and everybody here really about that. And stressing that to policymakers is that trust the farmers. They know what they're doing, they know what they're getting into, and they know what they don't want to get into. So supporting them, and that's where AFT comes in, and Rutgers, and hopefully University of Maryland. So, but I welcome further conversations because there's so much more that we could dig into. I personally can probably soapbox for an hour myself on all of this. So thank you, Colby, and everybody for having us, and looking forward to more conversations.
Well, thank you, American Farmland Trust as well. I mean, this was kind of your and Lucy's and Lightstar's kind of brainchild here. And we got, I said, if we're going to do this, I want to get some case studies, and that's how we got Nick and Byron on here. And it's good, very informative information. It's just the beginning of really understanding what the viability is here in Maryland. And, again, we live right on top of everybody here. And so, and the way these laws are moving, they're not going to incentivize everything being away, hundreds of miles away and have to shuttle the electricity in. They're going to want to put it where the people are. And if you do it in central Maryland, you're not going to put it on 100 acres because it doesn't exist. So we're going to need the smaller scale stuff. And why shouldn't farmers make the money on it, not just the developers? So thank you guys very much. I certainly appreciate it. We're going to wrap it up today, and keep a lookout for those that are still on. Keep a lookout for the recording. Ethan put a plethora of links in the chat, so please look at that stuff. Let me know if you guys need anything. Reach out to Farm Bureau, reach out to Farmland Trust. We put the links to everybody's email in there as well, so reach out to talk to these guys and get some more information. So thank you all again, and we'll see you later.
Thank you.
See ya.
Thank you.